Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. I want to do a reading on the full moon chart, or the chart for the Cancer full moon. That's happening today, January 13th at 5:27 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll actually probably be posting this after it happens. I was just having some technical difficulties. Before I talk about that, I want to share an announcement. So I posted the other day an article, or like last week or the week before, recently I posted an article talking about clarity that I've been getting for Astrology Journal. When I first started it up, I really didn't have a plan for it. I just wanted to write about astrology, but I was thinking about it more as a hobby because I didn't see astrology as a primary path for me. And then recently that's shifted, and I'm really seeing it more as a primary path. I've never felt called to do readings, and I experience really a pretty intense anxiety around those in terms of doing individual readings for people. So I won't be doing that, but I am starting to take Astrology Journal more seriously as an actual avenue, a path for possible work. And I'm limited in terms of what I can do to generate income, so this is a way that I can potentially provide that for myself. Early on, I decided to turn on paid subscriptions, not because I had a lot of subscribers or not because I knew what I was doing, but just to open up the option for potentially receiving a little bit of money. And my ethic at the time was really I wanted all my articles to be available for everybody, and all my posts and all of that to be available for everybody. I am somebody, I find it extremely difficult to leave people behind. I don't like that at all. I also know what it's like to not have a dime and to not be able to pay for things that I'm interested in. So I was really thinking along those lines. And anytime I thought about something that I might be able to provide just for paid subscribers, I would feel really a lot of angst about it because I didn't like the idea of depriving other people. But something shifted in the last couple of weeks, kind of after I got clarity that I do want this to be a path. And I can't explain it, but there was a shift in my relationship with the whole thing. And instead of thinking about providing some things just for paid subscribers as a withholding from other people, it started to feel like an expression of appreciation for people who are paying. So there have been a handful of people who have been paying from very early on when I started up this astrology journal, and really didn't have a clue where I was going with it, and was in a difficult place. And the money that has come to me from that has made my life a little bit easier. And so I realized that I really wanted to offer things as a way of appreciation. They're supporting me, and I want to acknowledge that through tangible things. So what I talked about in the article was that two things. Astrology Journal is going to be where I do lunation readings and readings of that sort, and that Pass It On Astrology is where I'm going to house things like the article series on the technical or learning sides of astrology, and I'll even be focusing on things that aren't explicitly astrology but that are very much related, like math and things like that. So I won't say more about it, but if you're interested in Pass It On Astrology, you can visit the About page there. You should be able to find it in my bio, in my profile here on Astrology Journal. So, and then so I started taking Astrology Journal more seriously, and astrology more seriously as a path. And after that happened, I was like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I want to just get square on the astrology for the year, just in terms of putting things in a calendar that I could easily access and all that kind of stuff. And as I was doing that, I was getting insights into the energy for the year. And I ended up writing an article about that. And it took me a long time to write. It took several days. And then I ended up sharing that with paid subscribers. And I knew the whole time I was doing it that it would be for paid subscribers. Because for me, in my mind now, the way that things have shifted, that felt like another way that I could say thank you to paid subscribers. And it's also reflective of it does take a lot of energy and work, and my energy is a little bit, that's the challenge for me in my life right now in terms of my health. And I just wanted to acknowledge that for myself also, that I am putting a lot of work into it. And I didn't want to, in a way, I didn't want to leave that to chance, whether or not people were going to pay for it or not. So I'm intending to do yearly overviews every year. So if anybody's interested in receiving those, you can become a paid subscriber and you will be able to access the yearly overview that I just posted. I'm sort of playing with the idea of doing monthly overviews also. I'm not sure if I will be able to do that, but that's something that I hope to actually be able to incorporate. And again, that will be for paid subscribers. The Lunation readings, which will be 2 a month, will continue to be for free subscribers for everybody. And so I feel like I'm not really depriving anyone of anything. I'm more adding extra things for paid subscribers, and that feels okay with me. And what I mean by I'm not depriving anyone of anything, all of the themes that I might talk about in the monthly or yearly overviews are going to come up in the Lunation readings. It's just that it's going to be specific. I'm going to be talking about a Lunation reading specifically, and I'll probably reference some of the other things, so bringing in some information from those that will be relevant. So it feels okay for me, and I hope it doesn't put anyone off. Like I said, I feel like it's a really good thing. I currently rely on assistants to be here in this world, and I don't like that. I haven't liked it the whole time I've been on it, and I really want to be able to support myself. So hopefully this will lead to that. So anyway, so that's the announcement. And then the other kind of minor announcement is if you've been to my Substack site recently for Astrology Journal, I just changed the color scheme. I did that yesterday. So instead of a dark color, it's a light blue color. And I changed it because it was hurting my eyes. It was stressing my eyes. To do so the way my process works, I do my writing of my articles on a different application, and then I'll transfer it here, and usually I'll do editing here, any editing, final kind of polishing and refinement here. And it's really hard on my eyes to work with that dark background and the white text. And that surprised me because I thought that the dark background would be better for my eyes, but it's not. So that's why the color change, that's why the quote-unquote brand change has happened. So a light blue background. So anyway, I like it. I hope you guys like it too. So now what I'd like to do is go on to the astrology reading. This is one of those charts where it's like there's no real clear pattern. You can see I did highlight a few things, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But pretend those weren't highlighted, it just looks like a whole lot of lines all over the place. And what I like to do is to find the patterns. And even if I don't find say a conventional astrology pattern like the kite or the grand trine or the T-square or whatever, I like to see if there's still some kind of pattern that's clear and discernible and that's meaningful, and then kind of look at the chart from that perspective. But I couldn't really find it in this chart. This is a bit of a stretch looking at this, but it is meaningful to look at it. But the interesting thing is there's actually meaning in there not being patterns. And what I mean by that is a while back I was looking at a chart similar to this in terms of just there wasn't a pattern to pick up on. And I realized it reminded me of images I've seen of fascia where the fibers are kind of going every which way. And that's not wrong. That's not something's wrong with the fascia. That's actually the way some kinds of fascia are meant to be. So, and the reason is somehow that allows them, the purpose of the fascia, the purpose of the connective tissue, that's really what I should be saying, connective tissue, is to support and cushion and provide kind of cushioning and support for the organs and the other structures of the body. And that sort of every which way kind of fiber orientation is part of how that does that. So if we look down here, this is an image of connective tissue, loose connective tissue, or I think it's called areolar connective tissue. You'll have to look it up, but I think it's AEROLA or OLAR, something like that. But anyway, it's loose connective tissue. And you can see fibers are going kind of every which way, and then there are these kind of nodes in here. And this is from Community College Bioscience Imagery. I found it on Wikimedia Commons. So I remembered seeing a picture like this, and it reminded me of what I was seeing in the chart that I was looking at the time. So one of the reasons I bring this up is because I really have been working a lot within myself in terms of my relationship with astrology to reshape and restructure how I understand the astrology, instead of, here's this thing coming. More like everything is meant to support us, and how can we see the way that it's meant to support us? And so even when everything seems kind of all over the place, it's actually what that is support. What that is are the energies showing up to support us, because that's really, I think, all the universe really truly knows how to do, is how do we support, is support in a way. Maybe that's a total Pollyanna perspective, but I think that's ultimately what's underneath everything. So anyway, I wanted to bring that perspective. So what I want to do now is look at this kind of sort of pattern. And I say kind of sort of because if you look at these dark dotted lines, they're crossing at the bottom. They're not coming together in a single point. And what I look for in patterns is a closed loop, things coming together, or I guess a closed circuit or something like that. And so that's not what this is. And when we look at these pink lines that are sort of here on the outer edge, it's almost like they're embracing these dark lines. They're also not coming together at a point. So I'm not exactly sure what this is. I guess we could call it a pattern, but it's not what I would typically think of as a pattern. Nevertheless, it's interesting. And so I want to look at it. So these dark dotted lines are keen deciles. And the keen decile is 165 degrees. There are two versions of it. There's a waxing version. And if we count 165 degrees, starting at 0 degrees of Aries and count it out on the natural wheel, that brings us to 15 degrees of Virgo. And I would call that the waxing version of the keen decile. So there is a Virgo, what I would say is there's a Virgo quality to the waxing version of the keen decile. And then if we count 165 degrees backwards on the wheel, that brings us to 15 degrees of Libra. And what I would say, I would call that the waning keen decile. And I would say it has a Libra quality to it. So right off the bat, we see that there's Virgo and there's Libra, and they come right after each other on the wheel. So this is one of the ways that I do astrology, is you kind of just, in a way, it's like you keep abstracting to get down to something really simple that you can sink your teeth into. So what we have here is Virgo. So what I like to emphasize about Virgo is the idea that it's about practice and skill development. So the daily practice that we do that helps us to develop skill. And that sets us up for Libra, Libra is this idea of balance and imbalance and being, judging and discerning. So to the extent that we've been able to develop our practices, identify and sort of step into and do our practices and develop our skill, we'll be better off when we enter the land of Libra, so to speak, where we're going to be challenged to maintain our balance. And the way we maintain our balance is through our daily practices. What are our daily practices that keep us stable and anchored and secure? Virgo is an earth sign. And so if we don't know what those are, or we know but we haven't done them or whatever, we get into Libra, we're probably going to find ourselves struggling to maintain balance, dynamic equilibrium. So right off the bat, we have that idea. And so the Kin Dasal themselves, I like to think about them as this idea of pressure. And I came to that one day when I was looking at a chart that had Kin Dasals and Cancer energy. And I realized that when the baby, and I've talked about this, by the way, before, and so those of you who listen to me, if this is a repetition, forgive me, but I want to make sure people who haven't listened understand where I'm getting my ideas from. So the Kin Dasal, when I was thinking that as the babies, we can think about this idea of pressure as the baby is going through the birth canal, the contractions are closing in on it, and that pressure, so it's putting pressure on the baby. That pressure, though, is for an essential reason, which is to prepare the baby for the new environment. So this was helpful for me because the only thing I was finding on the Kin Dasal was this idea of the fatal in the natal, or another one was something like the bandit in the transit. So these kind of negative readings of this energy, and I thought, well, everything's got a positive and a negative, a positive purpose, and then sometimes a dysfunctional or negative manifestation. So if it's fatal in the natal, what is the positive intention of that? And fatal in the natal is really about this idea of obsession and compulsion. When I thought about obsession and compulsion, the idea of pressure came to me. It's like you just kind of keep trying to go at something. And so maybe that's a little bit big of a leap, but that's how I've been starting to think about it, this idea of pressure. And the pressure is serving some positive function, some positive end. We can say that it's serving to get us from one environment to another, if we take the example of the baby in the birth canal. So there is both a waxing and a waning Kin Dasal in this kind of sort of pattern. So there's Ceres in Aquarius at the point of one of the Kin Dasals, and that goes all the way down. If we follow this dark dotted line down, that goes to Mars over here in Cancer. And that's a waxing Kin Dasal. So that one's Virgo in nature. And then we have another one that starts at Mercury in Capricorn, and we follow that line down, and it brings us to the moon in Cancer. And this is a waning Kin Dasal, and so that's the idea of balance. So what might the waxing, the Virgoan Kin Dasal be about? So one thing it might be about is this idea of emotional practice, practicing the skill of working with our emotions. If we think about Mars is retrograde right now. It started going retrograde in Leo, and it's been going back into Cancer, and it'll go forward again at some point and end up back in Leo again. And what is Leo? Leo is about expressing ourselves. And what is our expression? It's really founded on our emotions. When we're expressing an emotion of some kind usually. And so Mars is this idea of I am. And if we think about emotions, so I like to talk about feelings as our, which is what Taurus rules. I like to think of it as our navigational tools. We could think of our emotions as perhaps, our navigational tools in terms of what feels good and what doesn't feel good, that sort of thing. And our emotions might be more about our navigational tools as in terms of who we are. So if I know how to process my emotions so that, they kind of flow through me, and they bring through, when I can process them, they bring through knowledge and understanding and awareness, that helps me better know who I am. And if I know who I am, I'm going to know what my expression is. And I'm going to be able to and then if we bring in this idea of the inconjunct, if I know the skills and practices of processing my emotions, I'm maybe going to be better set up to express myself in more constructive and productive ways, in ways that instead of squandering my light, we can think of Leo as light, we can think about it as energy, we can think about it as expression. Instead of squandering my light, I will be constructively expressing it. And in that way, knowing how to process our emotions is part of what allows us to sustain our energy, our light. And I see Virgo, so Virgo comes after Leo, and I see Virgo is really about embodying our light, and in a sense, learning the skills of our light. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is I think that the skill development as it relates to Ceres and Mars, and especially I'm emphasizing Mars because it's in this retrograde period, this retrograde period, and I didn't say it, but it's also opposing Pluto, and it's going through this cycle where it went forward and it opposed Pluto. Now it's going backwards. It already opposed Pluto again, and then it'll go forward and it'll oppose Pluto one more time. In evolutionary astrology, they talk about Pluto being the desires of the soul, and Mars being the function of Mars being to enact the desires of the soul. And Mars also has to do with will, so we use our will to enact the desires of the soul. If we don't process our emotions, our desires may get the better of us, right? Like, to be able to work with our desires, we really need to be able to process our emotions. And if we don't, either our actions will be erratic or destructive, or maybe even it could lead to a shutdown. If we think about there is Capricorn in this pattern, it could potentially even lead to maybe shutdown or enervation or something like that. But so the idea being that if Mars is going to enact the desires of the soul, it has to know who it is, and it has to know how to process its emotions. And so the keen decile, waxing keen decile, is emphasizing this idea of daily practice. In order to enter into daily practice that is going to be sustainable for us and that we're going to want to show up for day after day after day, we need to know who we are. And we need to know what our light is. We need to know what and what our desire is. We need to know all these things. And so, and then Aquarius, Ceres is in Aquarius, this idea of our unique identity. All of these things, who we are, our emotional awareness, what our light is, all of these are parts of our unique identity and our unique genius. And in my view, what we are wanting to do in this world is to be able to access our unique genius and develop it and cultivate it so that we have that to contribute to the greater good. And that's I see Aquarius as having something to do with the greater good. It's about humanity and humanitarianism. It's also about organizations and the collective. And so to me, that all has something to do with this idea of the greater good. So anyway, that's kind of my thought about this waxing keen decile. I'm sort of debating launching into the story of Ceres and Demeter and Persephone, but I think I'm not going to do that. I don't think it's necessary. Well, except to say, so the one possible way to read it, I'm not an expert in mythology, but so the idea of Ceres, the story of Ceres, so there's Ceres and Demeter, so I can't remember, so there's a Greek version of the myth and there's a Roman version of the myth. In one of them, Ceres is Ceres, and the other it's Demeter, and I don't remember which is which. And then there's her daughter Persephone, or depending on the version, it's Proserpina or Persephone. And I think Proserpina is sometimes called Kore, Kore. But anyway, it's this idea of this mother and daughter, and I'm just going to use the word Persephone for the daughter, Pluto, Hades, comes up from the underworld and grabs Persephone down into the underworld. So, that story is really, all these myths, it's like really hard to wrap your brain around how to make sense of them. But perhaps one way to make sense of that story is the idea that if we don't know how to process emotions, we're not really going to know how to deal with our desires. And they're just going to, we're just going to do what we want, have our way in the world. But I think processing emotions, if we look at Capricorn, opposite of Cancer, Capricorn has to do with this idea of boundaries. So part of the way that we learn boundaries is through processing our emotions. Processing our emotions helps us to know who we are. When we know who we are, that helps us to, to set good boundaries, that sort of thing. And to recognize that just because we want something doesn't mean we get it, right? And that's, I think, really important information, knowledge for Mars. So that was another way that I was thinking about it. And if we look at this waning keen decile between Mercury and Capricorn and the Moon in Cancer, so that's Libran in nature, this idea of balance. So Mercury learning our emotions, learning how to process our emotions, learning the skill of our emotions, of how to process our emotions. So that's that Virgo archetype. So how did I get there? So Mercury rules Virgo. So we have the keen decile itself is Libran in nature, but Mercury as ruler of Virgo, and also of Gemini, by the way. But it has to do with this idea of learning. And so if we learn our emotions, then that is what will help bring us back into balance. To the extent that we're out of balance, that will help bring us back into balance. And we can also, I've been focusing on emotions, but we can also think of all the different things that Cancer represents: nurturance, nourishment, caring, feeding ourselves. It's really about this idea of nurturance and nourishment. So then there are these pink dotted lines, and one of them goes from Ceres to the Moon, and the other one goes from Mercury to Mars. So these don't cross. They also don't connect up at a point. These pink dotted lines, these are quad noviles. So the quad novile is a part of the novile series of aspects. And that novile series talks about this idea of the promise that is to come. And it comes from the reason I think about it that way is I read an article by John Sandbach, or I think it's Sandbach, and he talked about the novile series aspects as being about the fruit of the tree, but the tree is not fruiting right now. It's the fruit that will fruit on the tree. So the novile series aspects is about the promise of the fruit of the tree. That's how I think about it. So we are where we are right now. If we think about a tree, it is where it is right now. And in order for it to fruit, it needs, the right conditions to continue to grow so that it can reach that point. So again, Cancer is about this idea of nurturance and nourishment and mothering and all that, and it's also about our emotions. So we can think of learning the skill of our emotions as a way that we nurture and nourish ourselves. And so the promise is emotional skill. Perhaps we can say, on the one hand, the promise is emotional skill. By the way, these quad noviles are both waxing, and the novile is 40 degrees, so a quad novile is 40 times 4, so that's 160 degrees. And if we count 160 degrees on the wheel, we get to 10 degrees of Virgo. So we get Virgo again here. So the promise, it has everything to do with what we show up for and do day in and day out. And part of that depends on our ability to process our emotions. Mars rules Aries, and it is the I am principle. It's the very beginning of the zodiac. Chiron is moving through Aries right now. The wounded healer is moving through the I am territory. So the idea that to the extent that there have been wounds that have been preventing us from knowing who we are, those, those have been possibly, and maybe, I don't know, I was going to say probably, but possibly surfacing. And so that we can heal those layers. And the more we get into alignment with who we are, the more it might be, we might have an easier time processing our emotions. It's hard to process emotions, I would think, if you're confused about who you are. At the same time, by processing emotions, we can become more clear on who we are. So anyway, the promise, partly we need to know who we are, partly we need to know the skills of how to process our emotions. We also need to know what direction we're going in, and that comes down to, it helps a lot to know who we are, and it helps a lot to know how to process our emotions. So it all comes back to the same thing. And then we have Mercury in a quad novile with Mars, and so learning how to act. So if we are disconnected from our emotions, if we've Mercury learned to shut down our emotions, that was my strategy when I was a kid. I suppressed my emotions, and and Mercury is also the body and the mind. I suppressed my body too, so that I could accomplish my, what I wanted to do. And that is not a healthy way to go about living. And what ended up happening with me is I got sick and I didn't have the resources available to suppress our emotions. And so my emotions just ran roughshod over me. And I was at their mercy because I didn't know how to process my emotions. I hadn't learned that skill. So I had to develop that a little bit at a time. And that's the key also about Virgo. It's about doing what's there right now and doing a little bit every day, showing up every day and doing a little bit. To just give an example, because I think that we really, especially because we kind of live in this world that really glorifies the heroic, and we can think of Mars as having to do with this idea of the heroic. It's a distorted idea, I personally think. But what the heroic really is, we can maybe reframe it. Well, let me give my example first, and then that will help with the reframing. So if, say, I wanted to become an Olympic skier, downhill skier, I wouldn't start, if I was like 5 years old, I wouldn't start by going to the most challenging course and go up to the top and put my skis on for the first time and try to navigate that and try to do that. I would kill myself probably. I would start by going to a bunny hill and learning the basic skill of skiing. And then I would progressively learn a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. You can only progress if you start where you are. If you try to start beyond where you are, if you try to do this idea of the heroic that I think is which I think is what we think of as heroism, but I think is a mistaken understanding. If we try to do the heroic of doing it all at once or whatever, we're just going to fail and we're going to hurt ourselves and we may hurt others and etc. And so trying to do that will just lead to failure over time, repeated failure over time. Capricorn is failure. And eventually that might just lead to not having energy or will to do anything. I'm wondering the promise, I guess I didn't really talk about the promise. Mercury, the promise is that as we learn to master, Capricorn master, our emotions, the promise is that we will have control over our will and our actions and be able to walk or run or whatever in the world in constructive ways that are in alignment with who we are, that allow us to express our light in sustainable ways. And the key is this idea of practice. What are we showing up for day in and day out? There's one more inconjunct keen decile in the chart, and that is between the South Node in Virgo and Saturn in Pisces. And Saturn rules Capricorn. But what I want to focus on with this keen decile here is the node. And especially that it's in Virgo, it's really interesting. So the nodes, well, let me say it this way. The planets and the asteroids and whatever, they all progress through the chart in a counterclockwise direction, this way. And the nodes progress through the chart in a clockwise direction, so backwards through the zodiac. And I think that's really interesting. The counterclockwise direction of the chart is the yearly direction. And I think I've talked about this in another video way back, but I'm going to talk about it again now. The counterclockwise direction is the yearly direction, the yearly direction, we can say. So this is the direction the planets travel through the sky over the course of a year. The daily direction, or the clockwise direction, is the daily direction. This is the direction the planets travel through the sky over the course of the day. And if we think about the sun as the archetypal example of this, we know that it rises, on the horizon at daybreak, and then, or dawn, and then it rises to the highest point in the sky at noon, and then it sets at sunset, and then it goes underneath kind of our world and hits its midnight point, and then it starts to rise up again. And every planet goes through this just at their own time of day. So this is the daily direction. And the nodes, it's so interesting that they go backwards. They're, in evolutionary astrology, they're really considered our evolutionary trajectory. And so the south node is where we're coming from, our past. I like to think of it as our foundation, the thing that gives us a stable foundation that allows us to progress towards the north node, which is what we don't know. It's our future. It's our evolutionary trajectory. And so we don't want to just hunker down in the south node and avoid evolving and growing, but we also don't want to leave it behind and jump to the north node. We want to use this as a stable foundation that allows us to progress towards the north node. But the really interesting thing, so they move backwards. It's the daily direction. Our evolutionary trajectory, just if I'm gonna use the direction of the direction that they travel as part of the symbolism, then that suggests that our evolutionary trajectory is really based on what we do day after day after day. And when planets go retrograde, they're turning from their yearly direction to a daily direction. So it's almost like you can think about retrogrades as like, wait a minute, how do I get my daily, I'm traveling through the year and things are just happening. What's off with my practices? Is there a way, or can I refine my practices in any way? Can I bring myself into alignment with practices in any way? So we could think about the retrograde planets in that way, perhaps. But anyway, I just think it's really interesting that we have the south node in Virgo, so Virgo's emphasized again, and the south node itself having to do with this daily direction of the chart, and that daily direction having to do with what do we do? What we do day in and day out is going to determine our trajectory in our lives and in the world. So that's really what I wanted to say. And then Saturn has to do with this idea of mastery. So, and Capricorn also has to do with this idea of mastery. So mastering our emotions. And then the final thing that I realized I wanted to say is I actually talk a lot about Virgo and also Cancer in the yearly overview. So they'll be coming up throughout the year. I think we may continue to see them emphasized. But if you do want to get sort of that yearly take on those and how I'm seeing them, then it might be worth becoming a paid subscriber to look at that. But anyway, I appreciate you listening, tuning in. I hope there was something helpful. I always like to say, if it's helpful, that's great. They say, take what works and leave the rest. But I just like to say, if it's helpful, then that's good. Then pay attention to that. If it's not helpful, then it's not for you. Then it's the wrong thing. What matters is what's helpful for you. And the other thing that I like to say is every astrologer is going to have a different perspective. We all come in with our own experiences, our own filters, our own biases, our own kind of way of understanding and working with archetypes. So we're all going to say things, put our own spin on it. It's not that one spin is right and one spin is wrong. They're just different. And the question for you as a person tuning in and listening is this helpful for me? Does this give me insight? Does this help me better understand what's going on in whatever realm that matters to you? And And does it, I bias towards healing and, getting to know ourselves better and whatever. So for me, it's like, does it help us, better understand our situation and ourselves? So I just want to throw that out there as just an ending piece. So listen to who is, anybody who is helpful for you, those are the people to listen to. And hopefully there was something helpful for you here. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll try to put links to the things that I mentioned here so you can find them. And I will leave it there. And I'll be back with the new moon. And I think the new moon is on January 29th, so I'll be back with a reading for that. Okay, take good care. Bye.